The hours that followed were a blur of activity. Station security arrived to find Yuna standing over Threx's body, Seal cradled in her arms. For a moment, it looked like things might go badly. Weapons raised and demands shouted. Then one of the security officers recognized the dead Venturi. That is Commander Threx. He breathed, the biological warfare criminal. He was wanted by the Galactic Council. Suddenly, Yuna went from suspect to hero. She led them to the canisters hidden in the atmospheric processors, carefully sealed devices that contained enough bioweapon to kill every non-insectoid being on the station. Engineers worked through the night to remove them safely while medics tended to Seal's injuries. The dwarf dragon spent 3 days in the medical bay, his small body slowly healing from the trauma Threx's soldiers had inflicted. Yuna never left his side, sleeping in a chair beside his bed and growling at anyone who suggested she go home and rest. She is quite fierce. You're human, one of the nurses commented to Seal. The doctors are more afraid of her than any of the patients, Seal smiled, which made his bruised face ache. She is protective. All humans are, the nurse said, shaking her head in amazement. I have worked this station for 20 years, and I still do not understand your species. You adopt everything, form bonds with creatures you have no biological reason to care about. It defies logic. Maybe, Seal agreed, but I would not have it any other way. News of the incident spread quickly within a week. The story of the human veteran and her dragon companion was being told across the sector. The details grew more elaborate with each retelling, as such stories always do. Some versions claimed Yuna had killed 12 Vegari single-handedly. Others said Sile's white fire had frozen the entire corridor solid. The truth was both simpler and more profound. But the galaxy preferred its legend's dramatic merchants, who had once ignored. Seal now greeted him warmly when he passed. Children of 12 species pointed and whispered, their eyes wide with wonder. Is that him? They would ask their parents, the white dragon who saved the station. Seal did not know how to handle the attention. He had spent his entire life being invisible or mocked, and sudden fame sat awkwardly on his small shoulders. But Yuna helped him navigate it, teaching him to accept the gratitude without letting it change who he was. Heroes are just ordinary people who do what needs to be done, she told him one evening. You are still the same Seal who likes dumpling soup and falls asleep during holodramas. I do not fall asleep, Seal protested. I rest my eyes. Yuna laughed, a sound that had become more frequent since their ordeal. Some of the shadows that had haunted her for so long seemed to have lifted, facing Thrax. Protecting Seal had given her something she had lost on HFY 7, a sense of purpose. A reminder that she could save people instead of just watching them die. 2 weeks after Seal's release from the medical bay, a message arrived from Draconis 4. The dragon clan that had cast him out had heard the stories. They wanted him to come home. We were wrong about you. The message read, your white fire is not a curse, but a gift. Return to us, and you will be welcomed with honor. We can restore your place in the clan, give you the life that should have been yours. Seal stared at the message for a long time. Once, this was everything he had wanted: acceptance from his own kind. A place in the world of dragons, but that was before Yuna. Before this cramped little quarters that smelled of machine oil and soup. Before he had learned what family really meant. He deleted the message without responding. Yuna watched him do it, saying nothing. When he looked up at her, she opened her arms and he flew to her, curling against her chest the way he had done 100 times before. Regrets? She asked softly. None, he said with absolute certainty. I am already home. Life returned to something like normal. After that, Yuna reopened her repair shop, and Seal resumed his work as a translator and courier. But things were different now. Species who had once looked down on Seal now treated him with respect. Some even sought him out specifically. Wanting to hire the dragon who had helped stop a genocide, Yuna's reputation grew as well, attracting attention from people who valued discretion and results over flashy credentials. She took on occasional security consulting work, though she made sure never to be away from home too long, and in the evenings, they would sit together in their quarters. Yuna would work on some engine component or read from her datapad while Seal curled on his cushion by the heating vent. Sometimes they talked about everything and nothing. Sometimes they simply existed in comfortable silence. Two souls who had found each other against all odds. One night, a young Craxian stopped Seal in the corridor. He was barely more than a hatchling, towering over Seal despite his youth, his scales still carrying the soft sheen of adolescence. "You are the White Dragon," the Craxian said, his voice filled with wonder. "The one who saved the station." Seal nodded, unsure what to say. "My clan says I am weak because I cannot fight like my brothers," the young Craxian admitted. "They say I am an embarrassment." His eyes met Seal's, and there was such hope in them. "How did you do it?" he asked. "How did you become a hero when everyone said you were nothing?" Seal thought for a long moment before answering. "I did not become anything," he said finally. "I just stopped believing what they told me I was." He looked back toward the quarters he shared with Yuna. "And I found someone who saw me. Not my size or my color or what I could not do. She saw me. And she believed I was worth saving. Once you find that, once someone shows you what you are really worth, you can do anything." The young Craxian nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. "Thank you," he said softly, and walked away with his head held a little higher. Seal watched him go, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with dragonfire. Maybe that was the real power humans had. He thought not their strength or their weapons or their stubborn refusal to die. It was their ability to see value in the broken and discarded, to form bonds that logic could not explain, to love without reason and fight without limits for the ones they claimed as their own. Yuna had shown him that from the first moment she pulled him from that cargo container, and now he understood, truly understood, why the galaxy whispered about humanity with such fear and respect. Because a species that would go to war for a single broken dragon was a species that would never stop, never surrender, never give up on those they loved. That was terrifying in its way, but it was also the most beautiful thing Seal had ever known. He returned home to find Yuna setting up a card game on their small table. "I am teaching you poker tonight," she announced. "Prepare to lose your dessert rations for the next month." Seal laughed and climbed onto his stool across from her. Outside their window, the station hummed with its endless activity. Somewhere out there, species were scheming and fighting and struggling for power. But here, in this small space filled with machine parts and soup bowls and the quiet presence of someone who loved him, Seal was at peace. He was home, and that was everything. Commander Threx stood in the center of his quarters, surrounded by the 3 soldiers he had left. The others had been taken, vanished without trace, like prey snatched by a predator they never saw coming. His compound eyes scanned every shadow, every ventilation grate, every possible entry point. "It is one human," he snarled at his remaining forces, one limping female with outdated equipment. How is she doing this? None of his soldiers had an answer. They had fought humans before, had dismissed them as soft and fragile compared to the armored might of the Valkyrie, but this human was different. This human fought like something out of their nightmares. Yuna watched them from the maintenance shaft above, her scanner tracking their movements. She had spent the past 6 hours dismantling Threx's operation piece by piece. His ship was disabled, its engines sabotaged beyond quick repair. His communications were jammed, isolating him from any allies who might come to his aid. His soldiers were frightened, exhausted, and drugged. their reflexes slowed by the sedatives she had introduced to their supplies. It was time to end this, but first, she needed to find Seal. Her scanner detected a faint life sign in a room adjacent to Threx's main quarters. A small, warm body that could only be her dragon. The signal was weak, which meant Seal was hurt. That knowledge burned in Yuna's chest. But she forced the emotion down. Anger was a luxury she could not afford right now. She needed to be cold, calculated, precise. She dropped from the maintenance shaft into the corridor outside Threx's quarters. Her pulse pistol was in her hand, her body moving with the fluid grace of a trained killer. The first guard saw her and tried to raise his weapon. He was still bringing it up when her shot took him in the throat. The vulnerable joint between his head and thorax, he collapsed without a sound. The second guard lunged at her. Mandibles spread wide. Yuna sidestepped his charge and drove her combat knife into the gap beneath his wing casings. He shrieked and fell, clutching at the wound as his life drained away. 2 down. 2 to go. Threx and his last soldier burst from the quarters. Weapons blazing, Yuna dove behind a support column as plasma bolts scorched the air around her. The heat was intense, but her reactive armor absorbed most of it. She returned fire, forcing them back into cover. You cannot win this. Human, Threx called out. Even if you kill us all. The protocol is already in motion. The canisters are in place, he continued. In 8 hours, everyone on this station dies. Yuna did not respond. She had already guessed that Threx had some kind of dead man switch. Some way to trigger his bioweapon if he was killed. That meant she could not simply shoot him and end this. She needed to find the canisters and disable them first, but she also needed to save Seal. And she could not do both at once. The last guard made the mistake of exposing himself while trying to get a better angle. Yuna's shot caught him in the eye cluster, dropping him instantly. Now it was just her and Threx. The commander emerged from cover, a device clutched in one chitinous hand. Yuna recognized it immediately as a dead man's trigger, designed to send a signal the moment his grip relaxed. You know what this is, Threx said, his translator rendering his words in a calm, almost amused tone. If my heart stops, if I lose consciousness, if I so much as loosen my grip, the canisters release. Every atmospheric processor on the station, filled with my beautiful poison. He took a step toward her, confident in his protection. Put down your weapon. Human, accept the inevitable. The insectoid races will inherit the galaxy, and there is nothing you or anyone else can do to stop it. Yuna lowered her pistol, but she did not drop it. Her mind was racing, calculating options and outcomes. She could not kill Threx without triggering the weapon. She could not disable the canisters without giving Threx time to escape. She was trapped. And he knew it? Where is the dragon? She asked. Threx's mandibles spread in his unsettling approximation of a smile. The scale rat is in the next room, barely alive. Such a pathetic little creature. When I first saw him in the plaza, I knew he was nothing, a genetic mistake, an embarrassment to his species. And yet you came for him, Threx continued, genuinely puzzled. You risked your life, killed my soldiers, ruined months of planning. Why? He is my family, Yuna said simply. Threx stared at her for a long moment. Family, he repeated, as if tasting the word. You humans and your ridiculous attachments. You form bonds with everything, even broken little dragons that your own kind would have discarded. It is weakness, he declared. It is why your species will never dominate the galaxy as we will. Maybe, Yuna admitted, but it is also why I'm standing here. And your soldiers are not. A soft sound came from the doorway behind Threx. Seal stood there, barely upright, his white scales stained with blood and bruises. He had somehow freed himself from his restraints and dragged his battered body across the room. Threx spun toward the sound. Momentarily distracted, Yuna moved, Her knife left her hand before conscious thought could catch up. Burying itself in Threx's weapon arm, he screamed and staggered. But his other hand maintained its death grip on the trigger. "Foolish," he spat, ripping the knife free. "You cannot stop me without killing everyone on this station." Seal looked at Yuna, and something passed between them, an understanding that transcended words. "Yuna," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I need you to trust me." She nodded without hesitation. Seal turned to face Threx, this massive insectoid monster who had beaten him and caged him and called him worthless. "You think I am broken," Seal said quietly. "You think my white scales and my pale fire make me a mistake." "My own clan thought the same thing." He took a shaky step forward, his pink eyes fixed on the trigger in Threx's hand. "But they were wrong, and so are you." Threx laughed, a harsh rattling sound. "What can you possibly do, Scale Rat?" "You can barely stand." Seal opened his mouth, and fire poured out, but it was not the crimson blaze of a normal dragon. Not the burning destruction that his species was known for. Seal's fire was white as snow, cold as winter, a pale flame that drank light and heat rather than producing them. The white fire engulfed the trigger in Threx's hand, and the device simply stopped working. Its power cells drained in an instant, its circuits frozen solid. Threx stared at his hand in disbelief. "What?" He started to say. Yuna's pulse pistol spoke twice, and Commander Threx fell in the silence that followed. Seal collapsed. Yuna caught him before he hit the ground, cradling his small body against her chest. He was so light, so fragile. This impossible little dragon who had just saved everyone on the station. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick. "You crazy, wonderful, impossible creature." Seal managed a weak smile. "You came for me," he said. "Always," she promised. "Always." Aliens mock albino dwarf dragon. Unaware of his human veteran friend, Zial woke to pain. His entire body throbbed with it, a symphony of agony that made it difficult to think. He tried to move and found himself restrained, metal bands pinning his small form to a cold examination table. The room was dark, except for a single harsh light directly above him. Commander Threx stood at the edge of that light, his compound eyes reflecting Seal's battered form. "The Scale Rat wakes," the Vexry observed. "Good. I was beginning to think my soldiers had been too rough with you." Seal tested his restraints, but they held firm. His wings were pinned, his tail immobilized. Even his snout was clamped partially shut. He could breathe, barely, but speaking was impossible. "You heard things you should not have heard," Threx continued, circling the table slowly. "That presents a problem for me." The Vexry leaned close, his alien face filling Seal's vision. "The logical solution would be to kill you, but that might raise questions if someone came looking." He straightened and gestured to the shadows, where two more Vexry guards waited. "Instead, we will keep you here until the protocol is complete." Threx's mandibles clicked with amusement. "In 12 hours, every non-insectoid being on this station will be dead, including you. But you will die knowing that you could have stopped it. If only anyone had believed a worthless little scale rat." Seal thrashed against his restraints, but they did not budge. Threx laughed and walked away, leaving Seal alone with the guards. Time passed slowly in the darkness. Eel drifted in and out of consciousness, his injuries demanding rest that his fear would not allow. He thought about Yuna, about whether she would come looking for him when he did not return home. She would. He knew she always did, but would she find him in time? Meanwhile, across the station, Yuna was growing worried. Zeal should have been home hours ago, even accounting for delays and rescheduled appointments. He never stayed out past the evening meal without sending a message. She tried his communicator and got no response. She contacted the Mandari silk merchant and learned that Seal had never arrived for his appointment. A cold feeling settled in Yuna's stomach. The same feeling she had experienced on Hatchie 7, just before everything went wrong. She closed her shop early and went looking. Her search took her through the trade district, following Seal's usual routes. Merchants and travelers who knew her nodded in greeting, but none had seen her small friend. She was about to expand her search when she noticed something on the ground near a ventilation grate, a single pale white scale, the color of fresh snow. Scale. Yuna picked it up and examined the area more closely. Scuff marks on the floor, signs of a struggle that someone had tried to clean up, but had not quite erased. Her trained eyes read the scene like a book, and the story it told made her blood run cold. She returned to her quarters and stood before the hidden compartment she had not opened in 3 years. The code still worked, the door sliding aside to reveal the equipment she had kept from her military days. Her combat suit was outdated, but still functional. The reactive armor plating designed to absorb impacts that would kill an unprotected human. Her sidearm was a Terran Defense Corps standard issue pulse pistol, reliable and deadly at close range. A collection of tools filled the remaining space: breaching charges, scanner jammers, restraint cutters, and other items that would make station security very unhappy if they knew she possessed them. Yuna had told herself she kept these things as mementos, reminders of a life she had left behind. She knew now that had been a lie. She kept them because some part of her had always known this day would come, the day when someone would threaten her family. She suited up with practiced efficiency, the old motions coming back to her like riding a bicycle. Her limp seemed less pronounced as she moved, her body remembering the training it had never truly forgotten before she left. She accessed the station's public records and searched for information on the Vexery traders. What she found confirmed her worst suspicions. Commander Threx was not just a traitor, he was a wanted war criminal, accused of orchestrating biological attacks on 3 colony worlds. The official charges had been dropped due to lack of evidence, but the classified files that Yuna's old access code still unlocked told a different story. Threx was a fanatic who believed insectoid species were destined to inherit the galaxy. Every world he visited, tragedy followed bodies in the streets, entire populations wiped out by engineered plagues, and now he was here on Nexus Prime. With Seal in his clutches, Yuna's hands did not shake as she loaded her weapon. Her mind was calm, clear, focused in a way it had not been since Hatchie 7. The nightmares that haunted her sleep were silent now, drowned out by a single burning purpose. She would find Seal, she would stop whatever Threx was planning, and if anyone got in her way, they would learn why humans were the most feared soldiers in the galaxy. The hunt began. Yuna moved through the station like a ghost, avoiding main corridors and security checkpoints. Her scanner jammers kept her off the grid, and her knowledge of the station's maintenance tunnels allowed her to travel unseen. She located the Vexery's quarters and set up surveillance, noting guard rotations and entry points. There were 6 Vexery in total, including Threx himself. All were armed. All were trained soldiers despite their cover as traitors in a straight fight. They would tear her apart, but Yuna had no intention of fighting straight. She started with their communications, using her jamming equipment to isolate them from their ship and any outside contacts. Then she targeted their supplies, slipping into their storage area and contaminating their food with a mild sedative that would not affect her, but would leave the Vexery sluggish and slow. One by one, she began picking them off. The first guard vanished from his post without a sound, found hours later unconscious and restrained in a maintenance closet. The second disappeared while investigating a malfunction that Yuna had engineered in their quarters power grid. By the time Threx realized what was happening, half his force was gone. The remaining Vexery grew paranoid, jumping at shadows and starting at every unexpected noise. They huddled together in their quarters, weapons drawn, waiting for an enemy they could not see. Threx raged at his subordinates, demanding they find the intruder and eliminate them. But how do you fight a ghost? In the darkness of his cell, Seal heard the chaos through the walls. The Vexery guards, who had been so confident, now whispered fearfully among themselves. They spoke of a human, a female, who moved through the station like death itself, who struck without warning and vanished without trace. Seal's heart swelled with hope and fear in equal measure. Yuna had come for him, but she was one woman against 6 Vexery warriors. And despite her skills, those were terrible odds. He prayed to whatever gods might be listening that she would survive, that she would not sacrifice herself trying to save him, because he knew, with absolute certainty, that she would die trying before she would ever abandon him. That was simply who she was. That was what humans did for their own. Seal pressed his small body against the corridor wall as a group of Craxian merchants thundered past, their heavy boots shaking the metal floor beneath him at only 2 feet tall. He had learned long ago that staying out of the way was the key to survival on Nexus Prime Station. His pale white scales caught the overhead lights, making him glow like a ghost in the busy passageway. He hated how visible he was, how his albino coloring made him impossible to ignore. A normal dragon from Draconis 4 stood 15 feet tall with scales of deep crimson or emerald green. They commanded respect wherever they went, their very presence enough to make other species step aside. Seal commanded nothing but contempt. He clutched the data tablet to his chest and continued down the corridor toward the trade district. His job as a translator and document courier was not glamorous, but it paid enough to cover his share of the quarters he shared with Yuna. Most dragons would consider such work beneath them, but Seal had stopped caring about dragon pride years ago. Dragon pride had cast him out when he was barely old enough to fly. The trade district hummed with activity as Seal entered through the lower gate. Merchants from 100 different worlds hawked their goods while buyers haggled in dozens of languages. Seal understood most of them, his gift for languages being the one thing his albinism had not taken from him. He weaved between legs and tentacles and hovercarts, making his way toward the Menduri silk merchant who had requested his services. He was halfway across the main plaza when a massive chitinous leg blocked his path. Seal stopped and looked up, his pink eyes meeting the compound gaze of a Vexery trader. The insectoid being stood 8 feet tall, his exoskeleton gleaming with an oily sheen that Seal found deeply unpleasant. 2 more Vexery flanked their leader, their mandibles clicking with amusement. "What do we have here?" the lead Vexery asked, his translator device rendering his clicking speech into Galactic Common. "A scale rat has wandered into the plaza." Seal tried to step around them, but another leg shot out to block him. "Excuse me," Seal said quietly, keeping his eyes down. "I have a delivery to make." The Vexery laughed, a harsh rattling sound that made Seal's scales. "It speaks. The broken little lizard actually speaks. I heard the dragons of Draconis 4 threw out their defective hatchlings." One of the others said, "Looks like the stories are true." Seal felt the familiar burn of shame in his chest, but he kept his face still. He had heard worse things, had endured worse treatment. These insects were not the first to mock him, and would not be the last. "Please," Seal said again, "I need to pass." The lead Vexery leaned down, bringing his alien face close to Seal's. His breath smelled like rotting vegetation and chemical preservatives. "You need nothing, scale rat," he hissed. "You are nothing. Just genetic waste that should have been culled at birth." He shoved Seal with one leg, sending the small dragon stumbling backward. The data tablet flew from Seal's grip and clattered across the floor. Laughter erupted from the watching crowd, dozens of species finding entertainment in his humiliation. Seal crawled toward his tablet, his claws scraping against the metal floor. A Vexery foot came down on the device before he could reach it, the pressure cracking the screen. "Oops," the insectoid said with mock concern. "Clumsy little thing, are you not?" Seal stared at the broken tablet. At the delivery he could no longer complete. At the credits he would lose. He thought about fighting back. About showing these arrogant insects that even a dwarf dragon still had fire in his belly. But he knew better. Fighting back meant security involvement. Meant attention he could not afford. Meant potentially losing the quiet life he had built with Yuna. So he swallowed his pride, as he always did, and picked up the pieces of his tablet. "Thank you for your time," he said, flatly, and turned to leave. The Vexery's laughter followed him across the plaza, their mockery echoing off the high ceiling. Seal did not look back. He walked the long way home, avoiding the main corridors where he might encounter more trouble. His route took him through maintenance tunnels and service passages, places where only the station's forgotten inhabitants traveled. He belonged here, he thought bitterly, among the refuse and the shadows. The quarters he shared with Yuna were located in the mid-ring section, a modest space that felt like paradise after years of sleeping in cargo holds and abandoned compartments. Seal entered quietly, hoping she would be busy in her repair shop and would not notice his early return. No such luck. Yuna Park looked up from the engine component she was cleaning, her dark eyes immediately finding him in the doorway. She was not a tall woman by human standards, perhaps 5.5 feet, with black hair streaked with gray that she kept tied back in a practical knot. A faded scar ran along her left forearm, a souvenir from her military days that she never talked about. She walked with a slight limp that grew more pronounced when she was tired or when the weather systems on the station shifted. "You are home early," she observed, setting down her tools. "Client canceled?" Seal shook his head, unable to meet her eyes. "Equipment malfunction." Yuna was quiet for a moment, and Seal knew she saw through his lie. She always did, but she also knew when to push and when to let things be. "I made soup," she said finally, "the good kind, with those dumplings you like from the Hanyuri vendor. I am not hungry." Seal, he finally looked at her, and something in his expression made her own face soften with concern. She did not ask what happened, did not demand explanations or offer empty reassurances. She simply patted the seat beside her workbench. Seal crossed the room and climbed up onto the stool, his tail curling around the metal leg for balance. Yuna returned to her work, her hands moving with practiced ease over the engine component. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from years of living together, of knowing each other's wounds without needing to speak them aloud. "The Vexery traders," Seal said eventually. "They've been causing trouble all week." Yuna nodded without looking up. "I've heard things," she admitted. "They are pressuring merchants, making protection offers that sound more like threats. They called me genetic waste," Seal said quietly. "Said I should have been culled at birth." Yuna's hands stopped moving when she spoke. Her voice was carefully controlled. "Did they hurt you?" "Just my pride," Seal assured her. "They broke my tablet, but I can get another." Yuna resumed her work, but Seal noticed her grip on the tools had tightened. He knew that look. Had seen it before when station thugs had tried to shake down her shop 3 years ago. They had not tried again after that. Just stay away from them, Yuna said. "Men like that, they're looking for reasons to cause pain." Seal nodded, but something nagged at him before the lead Vexery had shoved him, before the mockery had begun. Seal had heard them talking. His gift for languages meant he understood Vexery speech, even without a translator. They had been discussing a shipment, something they called the cleansing protocol. The way they said it, with such cold anticipation, had made Seal's scales prickle with unease. He wanted to tell Yuna, but he did not want to worry her. She had enough troubles without adding his paranoid suspicions to the pile, so he kept silent, curling up on his cushion by the heating vent while Yuna worked outside their small quarters. The station hummed with its endless activity. Somewhere in the trade district, The Vexery were laughing and making plans, and Seal, the broken little dragon that nobody feared, was the only one who had heard them. 3 years earlier, Una Park had been a different woman. She had arrived on Nexus Prime Station with nothing but a duffel bag of belongings and a head full of nightmares. The Terran Defense Corps had given her a medical discharge after the incident on HFY 7. Along with a small pension and a recommendation for psychological counseling, she had taken the money and ignored the rest. The repair shop had been a stroke of luck. A failing business whose elderly owner wanted nothing more than to retire to a quiet colony world. Una bought it with her savings and threw herself into work, finding peace in the simple act of fixing broken things. Machines were reliable in ways that people were not. They did not scream when they died, did not call out for mothers who would never come, did not haunt her dreams with accusing eyes. She had been closing up shop one evening when she heard the scratching. It came from a cargo container that had been sitting in the alley behind her building for weeks. Abandoned by some shipping company that had gone bankrupt, Una had assumed it was empty. Just another piece of station debris waiting to be recycled. The scratching said otherwise. She found him inside. Barely alive, a tiny white dragon curled in a nest of shredded packing material. His scales dull and flaking, his pink eyes glazed with fever. Infected wounds covered his body. The marks of restraints and rough handling, a smuggler's prize, she realized. Abandoned when the heat got too intense, Una had never considered herself a nurturing person. She had been a soldier, trained to break things rather than fix them, but something about the small creature's labored breathing, about the way he flinched when she reached for him, broke through the walls she had built around her heart. She carried him inside and got to work. The first weeks were touch and go Seal, as he eventually told her his name was. Drifted in and out of consciousness, Una cleaned his wounds, forced fluids down his throat, and sat by his side through the long station nights when his fever spiked and his small body shook with chills. She learned things about him during his delirious ramblings. Fragments of a painful history. His clan had called him cursed from the moment he hatched. His white scales and pink eyes marking him as an abomination, dragons of Draconis, for prize strength and fire. And Seal possessed neither in the traditional sense. His flame was wrong, they said. Pale and cold instead of the proper crimson blaze. They had driven him out when he was barely old enough to survive on his own, casting him into a galaxy that viewed his kind with suspicion, even under the best circumstances. The poachers had found him on a backwater moon. Starving and desperate, they promised him passage to a world where he could start fresh. Instead, they locked him in a cage and prepared to sell him as an exotic pet to some wealthy collector. Seal's luck had held in one regard. At least the poacher's ship had been flagged for inspection when they docked at Nexus Prime, and they had fled rather than face questioning. They left their cargo behind, including one dying dragon in a forgotten container, when Seal finally woke with clear eyes. He found Una sitting beside him, reading from a datapad. She looked up when he stirred, her expression neutral but not unkind. "You have been out for 2 weeks," she told him. "I was starting to think you did not want to wake up." Seal had stared at her for a long moment. This strange human who smelled of machine oil and medicinal gel. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracked and weak. "Why did you help me?" Una considered the question before answering. "I found something broken," she said simply. "Fixing broken things is what I do." It was not the whole truth. Seal would learn later, but it was enough for that moment. He stayed because he had nowhere else to go. And Una let him stay because the nightmares were quieter when she was not alone. They learned each other's rhythms over the following months. Una discovered that Seal had a gift for languages. Able to pick up new tongues with remarkable speed, he started helping around the shop, translating for her non-human customers, and eventually found work as a courier and translator. Seal discovered that Yuna woke screaming some nights, calling out names he did not recognize. He learned not to approach her during these episodes, to simply call her name softly until she returned to herself. One night, after a particularly bad dream, she told him about HFY 7. Her squad had been ambushed during what should have been a routine patrol. She had watched her friends die one by one, unable to save them, barely escaping with her own life. The limp came from shrapnel, but the medics could not fully remove. The nightmares came from memories that no amount of time could erase. I am broken too, she admitted in the darkness, just in ways you cannot see. Seal had curled up beside her that night, his small warm body pressed against her side. They did not speak of it again, but something had shifted between them. They were no longer just two damaged souls sharing space. They were family now. 3 years later, Seal sat in their quarters and watched Yuna work. She had not asked about the vexery again, but he knew she was thinking about them. He could see it in the tension of her shoulders, in the way her hands gripped her tools just a little too tightly. I need to go back to the trade district tomorrow, Seal said carefully, to explain about the broken tablet and reschedule my delivery. Yuna nodded without looking up. Be careful. I always am. That was not entirely true. And they both knew it. Seal was careful in the way that prey animals were careful. Always watching, always running. Yuna was careful in a different way. The way a predator was careful, calculating angles and distances and threat levels. The next morning, Seal made his way back to the trade district. He kept to the edges, avoiding the main plaza where the vexery had humiliated him. His path took him past their temporary quarters, a large suite they had rented near the docking bays. He meant to walk past quickly, to draw no attention, but voices drifted through the ventilation grate, and Seal's ears caught words in the vexery tongue. The shipment arrives in 3 days. Someone was saying Commander Threx wants everything in position before then. And the cleansing protocol? Ready for deployment, the first voice confirmed. 1 canister in each atmospheric processor. That is all it takes. How long before it spreads? Station-wide coverage in 6 hours, came the chilling reply. Every non-insectoid species will be dead within 12. Seal froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. He had to tell someone. Had to warn the station authorities. He turned to run and found Commander Threx standing directly behind him. The massive vexery's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile. Well? Wow, Threx said softly. The little scale rat has been eavesdropping. Seal opened his mouth to scream, but a chitinous hand clamped over his snout before any sound could escape. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the cold gleam of Threx's compound eyes.